Frankenstein. Bavaria, southern part of Germany, 1857. Well, the Alps was an area of Germany that was always known for beautiful scenery, green alpine, but soon these areas would be known for a monster that would be running loose. Well, this is the story of Victor Frankenstein, a man who wanted to play God and paid for it dearly. Well, at a cemetery nearby where his laboratory is at, Victor Frankenstein and his assistant Fritz were hiding behind a grave as the funeral was being conducted. The priest said a few words in Latin, and after he was done, the funeral was over. The casket laid into the hole, and the family members left. They were going to wait until later to bury the casket. Well, after everyone left, Frankenstein and Fritz lift their heads up. Frankenstein says, "All right, Fritz, let's do it." Well, the two men run over and lift the casket out of the hole. Frankenstein opens the casket, takes out his medical bag, and takes out a jar of formalin and several surgical instruments. He then proceeds to remove both hands from the cadaver. Well, after they were finished, Frankenstein shuts the casket and him and Fritz lower the coffin back into the hole and leave before the gravediggers can go do their jobs. Later on that night, at the local charnel house, Frankenstein comes in. He asks the manager, "Do you have what I want?" The manager of the charnel house says, "Yes, sir, but I need to see the money first." Frankenstein reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out 2 gold coins and puts them onto the counter. The manager puts his hands on both coins and pulls it back towards him and puts the coins away and is like, "I'll be right back, sir." He goes into the back room and then comes out and puts a jar of formalin containing 2 eyeballs. And he says to Frankenstein, "It's good doing business with you, sir." Frankenstein says, "It's good to do business with you too." Well, later on that night at the same charnel house, Fritz breaks in, but he was not getting eyes for the man he was working for. Fritz takes out a giant meat cleaver and cuts a good healthy looking leg. After he retrieves the leg, he runs off with it. Well, later at Frankenstein's laboratory, Frankenstein turned an old fort into his laboratory. The top floor was really the only part that was pretty much habitable, so he made his home there and his laboratory. Well, his laboratory was a mishmash of chemistry sets and giant electrical equipment. There were also tubes filled with formalin, and each tube contained a human body part with wires running into them. He was doing some sort of experiment. Well, on the main table in the center of the laboratory, Frankenstein was sewing together the body parts he had taken. Well, he sewed the hands onto the arms of the body he was making. Then Fritz comes in and says, "Hey, Dr. Frankenstein, I've got your leg." Frankenstein tells him to put the leg on the table over there. Fritz does so. Frankenstein comes, unwraps the leg, and looks at it, and is like, "Ah, it's perfect. Nice, healthy, muscular, like the rest of the body." Then he grabs the leg and takes it over to the main table so he could sew it on later. Then Fritz asks the doctor, "So, Dr. Frankenstein, when is this creation of yours going to be ready?" Frankenstein tells Fritz, "Well, it's about 98% now since you got me that leg. But to be 100%, I need a brain." "A brain," he says. "A brain of a genius. And Fritz, you're going to get me that brain." Frankenstein goes on to explain, "Tomorrow night, you're going to break into the University of Ingolstadt, and you're going to steal me the brain of a genius. Dr. Waldeman, my old mentor and teacher, has several brains in jars on display in his classroom. You're going to steal the one labeled genius. and then you bring it back here, and I will put it into this body. And then I'll carry on my experiment and bring life back to the dead. Well, the next night at the University of Ingolstadt, Dr. Waldman was given a lecture to medical students. After his lecture was over, he dismissed everybody. Everybody applauded, and all his students left the classroom. Afterwards, he left his classroom. Well, there was a storm brewing as lightning was crashing. Well, Fritz enters the classroom, and he goes over to the desk, and there were 2 jars of brains. One was labeled genius, and the other one was labeled abnormal. Well, Fritz grabs the jar labeled genius. As he was sneaking off, and he turns around, a bright flash of lightning illuminates the classroom, and he sees a hanging skeleton, and it frightened him, and he dropped the jar containing the genius brain. Fearing that the noise might draw attention, he grabs the second jar with the abnormal brain and pulls off the label and runs off. Well, the next day he had brought the brain to Dr. Frankenstein, and Dr. Frankenstein takes the brain out of the jar and proceeds to put it into the skull of his new creation. Then he wheels over a giant glass jar containing some sort of liquid inside. He tells Fritz, "Well, Fritz, I am done. I have made my own version of the elixir of life. It is now time to put it into my creation." Frankenstein grabs the tube and puts the needle into the vein of the arm and begins pumping the elixir of life into his lifeless creation. After he was finished, he turns to Fritz and says, "Well, Fritz, tonight we begin the new frontier in science. I want you to get the tank ready for tonight. Nothing's going to stop us tonight. Nothing." Well, unbeknownst to Frankenstein, it was not going to just be him and Fritz witnessing his experiments. Meanwhile, back at the family castle, Frankenstein lived with his father, Baron Frankenstein, and he was going to get married soon to the beautiful Elizabeth Lavenza, a noblewoman just like Frankenstein. Frankenstein's father, the Baron, was a very overbearing man ever since his wife died, and he seems to be getting worse as he gets older. Well, young Frankenstein would do what most people would do in his shoe. He tried to spend as less time at the castle and more time abroad, and his science experiments were his getaway. Really, his science experiments were the result of him witnessing his mother's death when he was young. He wanted a way to beat death, to cheat death, a way to resurrect a person through science, and he was going to do that by any means necessary. Well, at the castle, his father was screaming, "Where is that boy at?" Frankenstein's fiancée answers the Baron and says, "Herr Baron, do remember now that your son is no longer a boy. He's 25 years old." Well, the Baron screams, "He's always going to be a boy to me. Now, where is he? I swear, ever since his wedding day's been getting closer and closer, he has been disappearing for a lot longer." Elizabeth says he's been tied up on some experiment. He says it's going to be the biggest breakthrough in science since galvanism. Well, the Baron didn't want to hear of it. He was never approving of his son's scientific endeavors. He always thought it was foolish. Then another man enters the room. Frankenstein's best friend, Heinrich. They have been friends since children and friends through college. And now Heinrich was going to be Frankenstein's best man. He was also of the aristocracy, but unlike Frankenstein, he pursues business instead of science. Well, he comes in the room and says, "Oh, good afternoon, everybody. I'm hope I'm not disturbing anything important." Baron Frankenstein says, No, boy, you're not disturbing anything important. In matter of fact, you could answer me this question. What is my son doing out there in that old fort?" Heinrich says, I wish I knew, Baron. I mean, he says he's working on something important. He doesn't want anybody around. He doesn't let me, his best friend, near that place. The only one who's allowed to go there is that weird fella, that redheaded fella, Fritz, who he hired. And talk in the village says that he's a criminal. Well, the Baron did not like to hear that. He says, "Oh, no, no, no. I don't want that. Oh, my son always chose poor people to hang around with. Now he's hanging around a criminal." Well, Elizabeth says, "Oh, Baron, just don't worry. I'm sure he'll be coming home tonight. He has to. His dear friend, Dr. Waldeman, that professor he looked up to at the University of Ingolstadt, is coming over for the wedding. He's arriving tonight." The Baron said, "Oh, excellent. I enjoy Dr. Waldeman. Met him twice. Very pleasant fellow." Well, later on that night, the Baron was having dinner with his soon-to-be daughter-in-law, Heinrich, and Dr. Waldeman. The Baron says, "I'm glad you're here, Dr. Waldeman. My son talks so highly about you. You and that other one that you guys threw out, Dr. Pretorius. Well, I'm glad you're here for the wedding. My son really looks up to you. You were his favorite teacher in the university." Dr. Waldeman says, "I am flattered, Herr Baron, to hear that. Your son, Victor, was the brightest student I had at the university," said Dr. Waldeman. The Baron smiled, so did Elizabeth, so did Heinrich. Then there was a knock on the dining room door. The Baron screams, "Come in!" Well, it was the maid. She comes in and says, "Herr Baron, here's a letter from your son." So the maid handed over the Baron the letter. The Baron opens the letter and reads it and pounds his hands on the table. After everyone saw the Baron's anger, all three people at the dining room table asked at the same time, "Herr Baron, what's going on?" The Baron screams, "I can't believe this! I can't believe this! That's it! That's it! My son just wrote to me that he can't make it tonight. Even when we have guests here, he still can't make it. I did not teach him poor etiquette like this. I don't care about some experiment. I'm going over to that fort, and I'm going to drag him back here kicking and screaming. It's for his own good." Dr. Waldeman says, "That experiment he wrote to me about." Well, everyone looked at him intently, wondering if he told him about the experiment. Dr. Waldeman saw the look on the people's faces and says to them, "Oh, he didn't tell me what the experiment was. He just said if it's successful, he was going to demonstrate it the next year at the Geneva Medical Conference." Well, everybody turned to look at the Baron to see what the Baron was going to do, and the Baron says, "That's it. I'm going over there, and that's final." Heinrich gets up like, "No, no, no, Herr Baron, don't anger yourself. Let me, Elizabeth, and Dr. Waldeman go over there. Maybe the three of us can convince him to drop what he's doing and come back home, so that way, there could be peace with everybody." The Baron looks at Heinrich and says, "Okay, you three go, and I want him back here. You hear me? I want him back here." Well, meanwhile, at the old fort, Frankenstein was there with Fritz. They were getting the final preparations ready for the experiment. The creature that Dr. Frankenstein made was laying inside a brass tub that was filled with boiling saline solution to warm the body up. Well, they were doing the final checks and making sure everything was in place. Well, while Dr. Frankenstein was doing that, Heinrich, Elizabeth, and Dr. Waldeman were crossing the massive property to the old fort where Frankenstein had his laboratory at, as a violent storm was brewing. By the time the three got to the front door of the old fort, the storm winds had picked up and they were strong. Then the three people began pounding on the front door of the fort, screaming for Frankenstein to let him in. "Victor! Victor, let us in. It's storming out here badly. Let us in. We have to talk to you. Frankenstein hears the door pounding from up in his lab and he says, "Oh no, what are they doing here?" Fritz looks at them and is like, "Doctor, what do you want me to do?" Frankenstein looks at Fritz and tells Fritz, "Go downstairs and send them away. I cannot be disturbed tonight. No, no, no." Fritz says, "Yes, doctor, I'll take care of them." Then Fritz goes walking down the long spiral staircase to the bottom level and opens the door. And he tells the three, "Dr. Frankenstein does not want to be disturbed tonight. He's on the verge of a major breakthrough and says he does not want to be disturbed." Well, Waldman, Heinrich, and Elizabeth force their way in. Then Heinrich says to Fritz, "Well, it was either us or the Baron coming here tonight, and you don't want the Baron coming here tonight." Fritz looks at the three and he says to them, "You wait down here until the experiment is over." Elizabeth says, "No, no, no. You take me to see my fiancée now." Well, after those stern orders, Fritz like, "Fine, follow me if you can walk up long stairs." Then Fritz proceeds to guide the three people up the long stairwell up to the laboratory. Well, he enters the room with the three people, and Frankenstein says, "Ah, good, Fritz. I hope you're able to send those unwanted guests away. I hate to do this in the middle of a bad storm, but I must not be interrupted tonight." Well, Dr. Waldman says, "I would like to know, young Frankenstein, what is so important that you treat your guests so badly?" Frankenstein looks and his eyes lit up. He says, "Dr. Waldman! Dr. Waldman, you're here! Oh my god, Dr. Waldman, I'm so glad you're here. You were on time to witness history." Heinrich then asked Frankenstein, "What history? What are you doing? Your father's concerned. He was going to come here tonight and drag you out, but we stopped him, and we came over here in his place to see what's going on. Why you've been neglecting Elizabeth, why you've been neglecting me, and why have you been neglecting your mentor." Frankenstein looks at all three of them and says, "Well, since you three are here, I might as well tell you." He says to the three of them, "It all started a long time ago when I was 8 years old. My mother had died. Well, it was a traumatic experience for me. I remember the doctor trying his damnedest to save her, but he couldn't. So I decided to do something about it, and when I went to university, I decided to major in medicine and human anatomy to see if there's a way I could stop death or cheat it altogether. Then I came up with a very interesting theory. What if the brain can be transplanted into another body, any body, even a body like this one that's been made out of bits and pieces of other bodies?" Well, I had encouragement in my theory by the illustrious Dr. Pretorius, who was a good mentor to me along with Dr. Waldman. Dr. Waldman then interrupts Frankenstein and says, "No, no, Dr. Pretorius was a bad influence on you. He was a madman, and we had good reason to throw him out of the university, and it seems it was too late. He already influenced somebody. He influenced you." Well, Frankenstein says to Dr. Waldman, "No, Pretorius was right." Then he goes on to say, "After I graduated from the university, I poured myself into research. I researched every alchemical text written by everyone from ancient times to recent times, and I came up with my own theory. I found a way to make a viable elixir of life using the right chemical methods, though, the ones that the ancients didn't have access to." Then Frankenstein says, "Then I needed a body. So I made a body out of bits and pieces. Then I needed a brain, and I got a brain. Well, tonight I shall give the spark of life to my creation to see if my theories are right. Right now, what you're seeing here in this brass tub is the body being warmed up to the normal body heat temperature. Then, once I drain this tub, I shall administer the spark of life, thanks to all this electrical equipment here," said Frankenstein. Then Elizabeth says, Victor, don't do that. No, don't play God. You will pay for it dearly, my love. Then Frankenstein says to Elizabeth, no, Elizabeth, you worry too much. This is going to be a success. I can feel it. Well, Frankenstein says to all three of them, you're going to have to be witness now. Then he turns around to Fritz and shouts, Fritz, go downstairs and start putting that steam engine to work. We commence now. Fritz says, yes, Dr. Frankenstein. Then Frankenstein walks over to the tub and drains the saline out. Then he goes over to grab two cables. Then he puts the cables on each neck bolt, and he explains to the three, these neck bolts are connected to a wire that goes directly into the heart and spinal cord. So, what's next, he said? That machine there, that's a dynamo, he says to the three of them. That thing will start generating electricity once Fritz starts getting the steam engine going that's down in the basement. Down in the basement, Fritz was shoveling coal into the steam machine. Then the steam machine was starting to gain life. Within moments, the steam engine started to do its job. Then the steam engine starts turning gears on the ground. The gears were gaining speed as the machine was moving faster. Those gears were driving a belt above in the laboratory, the belt that was cranking the dynamo at high speed, allowing it to generate continuous electricity. Within moments, the entire laboratory was lit up in blue lights, as the electricity was going from one spark gap pole to the other, illuminating the entire laboratory. Even the Leyden jars that were in the base of each spark gap pole were glowing with blue light as they were being filled up with energy. The spectacle was very wondrous, but at the same time frightening. But the one thing that was also troubling was the loud hum of the electricity as it was crossing from one pole to the other. Then Frankenstein, speaking a little loud so he could be heard over the electrical hum, was telling what he was going to do next, as he says, now, my good friends, you shall see my creation come to life as soon as I pull this lever, which will cause electricity to go into him. Then he starts counting, 1, 2, 3, and he flips the switch. Then electricity begins to course through the lifeless body, causing it to flop like a fish out of water. Then Frankenstein quickly flips the switch back up, turning off the electricity. He shouts to Fritz, Fritz, go downstairs and kill the engine. Fritz says, yes, doctor. Then Frankenstein goes over to his creation and pulls out the cables from the neck bolts. Well, the laboratory fell silent as the dynamo was killed and the steam engine in the basement was killed. The silence in the laboratory was creepy, except for the few punctuations of distant thunder. Frankenstein was over his creation, looking at the bandaged corpse. As soon as Fritz got back upstairs, Frankenstein shouts, Fritz, give me my stethoscope over there. Fritz grabs the stethoscope, runs it over to Frankenstein. Frankenstein gets down on one knee to listen to the chest of his creation to see if there's a heartbeat. Soon, Frankenstein's eyes lit up as everyone saw Frankenstein had heard what he was wanting to hear, a heartbeat, a good healthy heartbeat. Then the creature began to take its first breath of life. Then Frankenstein jumps back up and screams with elation, "It's alive! It's alive!" Then Heinrich and Dr. Waldman run over to calm Dr. Frankenstein down. As the creature gets up, he gets up on both legs for the first time. Then he slowly steps out of the tub, revealing the creature's true height. The creature was close to 8 feet tall. Elizabeth was frightened, but what she was about to see was going to frighten her even more. Then the creature reached up for its head and began pulling the bandages off. As it unwrapped the bandages from its face, it revealed its face. It was a hideous looking face, scarred with stitches, the neck bolts, and the flat head due to the cranial flap being flat. Well, it was such a hideous sight that Elizabeth passed out from shock and horror. The next day, Dr. Waldman and Frankenstein were sitting at the table in the lab, talking about the implications of Frankenstein creating that creature. Dr. Waldman was being doom and gloom and saying to the young scientist, "You don't know what you have done, Frankenstein. You created a monster. You violated the laws of God. There is going to be severe consequence. I could feel it," said Dr. Waldman. "You were my best and brightest student in the university," said Dr. Waldman. "I thought you would never go this far. Dr. Pretorius really influenced you horribly," he says. Well, Frankenstein says, "Oh, come on, Dr. Waldman, I'm tired of hearing this crap. I hear it from Elizabeth now, and Heinrich, now from you. I'm sorry, I'm doing the world a favor by creating this thing. I'm showing the world that death is not permanent, that death can be defeated." Then Dr. Waldman goes on to say, "At what price?" He says to the young Frankenstein, "At what price? That brain that your friend stole? Did he tell you the brain that he stole from my classroom?" Frankenstein paused, but then continued and says, "Yes, that's the brain of a genius. I knew you had it in your class, that's why I sent him to take it." Well, Dr. Waldman laid the bomb on Dr. Frankenstein. He says, "Oh no, Victor. That was not the brain of a genius. The brain of a genius was shattered on the ground. The brain that your friend Fritz stole was that of an abnormal man." Frankenstein looked with a look of shock in his face. Dr. Waldman said, "Yes, an abnormal brain. The brain of a man who murdered a lot of people up in Dusseldorf. He was executed and his brain was taken out and it was given to me to study, which I did, and then you stole it." Then the shock in Frankenstein's face turned into anger, and he says, "Damn it, Fritz, why did you lie to me?" Suddenly, they heard the footsteps coming. As the footsteps were coming closer, the door opened. It was Frankenstein's creation, the creature, as he comes walking into the laboratory with heavy footsteps. Dr. Waldman again was shocked. This time, it was because the monster was closed. He says, "Dr. Frankenstein, you closed the monster. Where did you find clothes for something that big?" Frankenstein says to Dr. Waldman, "These clothes belong to a former giant that used to be part of a circus. He's been long dead. I went over to his wife at the village, and she graciously gave me his old clothing. They were the only ones big enough to fit him. He also was 8 foot tall." Then Frankenstein gazed at his creation. It was a magnificent work for him, and he says to Dr. Waldman, "Dr. Waldman, you must admit this is a wondrous scientific invention, a discovery. You can bring back the dead." Then Dr. Waldman interrupted Frankenstein. He says, "Victor, don't forget about the brain that's in that creation of yours. It's only a matter of time. You gotta remember, it's a brain. How long will it take it to regain its former faculties of its former life? That is the one question I have." Victor says to Dr. Waldman, "Maybe it won't regain its former faculties. Maybe it's not going to remember its past life. At least I hope. Well, Victor whistles for Fritz. Then Fritz comes into the room. Fritz says, "Yes, doctor?" Frankenstein says, "Fritz, take him down to the cellar and lock him in there. And you have your instructions to follow while I'm away on honeymoon." Fritz says, "Yes, Dr. Frankenstein." Then Fritz gently escorts the creature out of the laboratory, and as soon as they get down the long stone stairwell, then Fritz shows his true side to the creature. He pulls out his whip and violently whips the creature. The creature was reacting like anybody who was being whipped violently. Then he savagely struck back and attacked Fritz. Fritz was terrified, as he was easily overpowered by the gargantuan creature. Then the creature grabbed Fritz's head with both of his hands, lifted Fritz off the ground. Fritz let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed throughout the fort. Well, Waldman and Frankenstein heard it. Dr. Frankenstein quickly grabbed his syringe and a vial of sedative and filled his syringe with it, and him and Dr. Waldman ran down the stairs. Well, sure enough, the creature quickly crushed Fritz's skull with both of his hands. As soon as the two doctors got downstairs, they saw Fritz's lifeless body and his skull crushed completely. The monster was flailing his arms in anger, screaming. Well, the two men were scared because, one, that thing was 8 foot tall. Number two, that thing just crushed the man's skull with ease. And number three, it was just terrifying, the sight of that creature flinging his arms in anger, trying to swing at everybody. But somehow, some way, Frankenstein worked up his nerve, quickly dashed, and with the needle stabbed the monster in the back and injected it with the sedative. Well, it took a while, but the sedative finally kicked in and the monster fell unconscious. Dr. Waldman tells Victor Frankenstein that, "I told you so, look what happened here, he killed Fritz." Frankenstein saw the whip by Fritz's body and is like, "Yes, I can see why he killed Fritz." He picks up the whip. That's it. Fritz was mistreating him, and this is what caused him to go violent. Anyone would have done this if they were being mistreated like this. Dr. Waldman says, "It still doesn't justify it, Frankenstein. You know it. This monster just reacted violently to someone whipping him, and he just crushed the man's skull with ease. You see the strength the thing possesses. You have to destroy it, Frankenstein," says Dr. Waldman. Frankenstein says, "Fine. I'll destroy it, but it won't be me that destroys this wondrous creation of mine. You'll do it. It'll give you a chance to dissect it and see what made it tick." Dr. Waldman said, "So be it, Dr. Frankenstein. If you want me to do this, I will. I'll be at the wedding still." Then Frankenstein says to Dr. Waldman, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow then at the wedding, Dr. Waldman. Good night." Dr. Waldman says good night back to him. Well, Frankenstein leaves back home to his castle, to his father screaming at him like he's still a small child, and Elizabeth hugging him. He explains to Elizabeth and Heinrich about what happened, and how Dr. Waldman was going to destroy the creature. Well, Dr. Waldman had the creature on the laboratory table. He was ready to do the dissection as he laid out his surgical instruments. As he was about to make the incision, the monster regained consciousness. He grabs Dr. Waldman's hand that had the scalpel and crushes it. Then he snaps Dr. Waldman's neck. He gets up from the table and walks out of the laboratory, down the stairs, and exits the old fort. He was now loose in the countryside. Well, the monster was loose in the countryside, and it was hungry, and he saw a bunch of sheep. The monster goes over and attacks the sheep, killing them, and starts eating them. But his crimes didn't go unnoticed. A young shepherd boy had saw the whole thing unfold. The little shepherd boy comes running. He takes out his slingshot, pulls back the slingshot, and fires a lead ball at the monster. It hits the monster in the arm, and the monster lets out a violent scream as he clutched the arm that the ball hit him in. He turns around and sees the boy, and quickly runs after the boy. The boy ran as fast as he could, but the monster caught up to him, grabbed his arm that had the slingshot, and yanked his arm out of its socket, leaving the boy now with one arm. And the boy ran off clutching the stub where his arm used to be, trying to stop the bleeding while at the same time running and screaming. Well, the next morning, the whole town was preparing for the grand wedding celebration of Frankenstein and Elizabeth. Well, the town already had started the wedding celebration as people were dancing in the street, playing music and drinking and eating, while Elizabeth was getting ready in her room. She was unaware about what was going on. So was Frankenstein. But Frankenstein, concerned, sent Heinrich to check on Dr. Waldman. But his wedding day was going to be ruined as Heinrich comes running back home and says, gasping for air from running from the fort to the castle, "Victor, it's Dr. Waldman. He's dead. Monster broke his neck." Victor Frankenstein was like, "Oh dear God, no, and the monster's loose, isn't he?" Heinrich nodded his head yes. Frankenstein says, "Oh, just great, just great. All right, don't say anything to anybody. I don't want Elizabeth to know about this, and I especially don't want my dad to know about this. We're going to continue as nothing's happened, and if they ask about Dr. Waldman, we'll just say that he got called away on an emergency." Heinrich nodded his head yes, that he understood. Well, outside of the village and one of the farms that dotted the landscape, a local man was finishing his morning chores as he was getting ready to put away everything. His little girl, Maria, was playing with her little kitty cat out in the field. She asks, "Daddy, are we going to go to the wedding?" The man says, "Yes, Maria, we're going to the wedding. I just got to put away everything, and then you, your mother, and me must get ready. We have to look our best when we go to the wedding of the Baron's son." Maria was excited because the wedding was going to be a major party, and all her friends were going to be there. Then Maria decided to go play out by the lake until her dad was ready to go inside and get ready for the wedding. Well, out in the woods by the lake, the monster was walking through the woods. Well, the monster stopped as he heard the voice of the little girl singing. Then he walked over and he exited the woods, and he ended up by the lake where the little girl was playing, throwing flowers into the water and seeing them float. The monster comes up to the little girl, but somehow, some way, this little girl was brave. She was not frightened by the monster. She says, "Hello, my name is Maria. What's your name?" The monster looks and lets out a slight smile. Then he gets onto his knees and then looks at the little girl, still smiling. The little girl figured that this monster, or this man, was a mute, and she was showing him the game she was playing, throwing flowers onto the water and watching them float. She picks a group of flowers and puts it into the monster's giant's hand, and she says, "Throw the flowers and watch them float." Oh, the monster threw the first flower, it floated. Then he threw the second one, it floated. And then he got excited and threw them all into the water and they floated. Like a child, he got excited and started clapping his hands. Maria says, "Wow, that was good. See how fun this is?" Getting more excited because he loved his new game and he had no more flowers. He grabs little Maria. Maria starts screaming, hey, put me down!" And then he chucks Maria into the water to see if she floats. But Maria didn't float. She drowned. Shocked at what he did, the monster ran off back into the woods. It was the early afternoon at the village. The village was still celebrating the impending wedding of the Baron's son and Elizabeth. Well, in her room, the young bride-to-be was getting ready as she was putting on her wedding dress. Unbeknownst to her that the monster was already on the castle grounds. As she was putting on her wedding veil and looking into the mirror, she noticed something looking into the bedroom from the window in the mirror. She turns to look. It was the monster. The monster then shattered the window. She let out a loud shriek, and the monster comes inside after her. Well, Elizabeth's scream echoed throughout the castle. Everybody came running to her bedroom, the bridesmaids, several men, and Baron Frankenstein. As they tried to open the door, but they couldn't, it was locked. Someone goes to Victor Frankenstein's room, knocks on the door. Victor Frankenstein, it's Elizabeth. She's screaming. There's something going on. Well, fearful of what's going on, Victor quickly grabs his black powdered hunting rifle and runs down the hall to where the crowds were by Elizabeth's room. Heinrich was there, like, Victor, we can't get this door open. Victor says, Heinrich, on the count of three, we kick down this door. Heinrich says, okay. And Victor counted down. 1, 2, 3. The two men quickly kicked down the door, and they saw the monster attacking Elizabeth. Baron Frankenstein screams, good God, what is that? Victor says, a killer. Then he points his black powdered rifle and fires a shot. The bullet hits the monster in the shoulder. The monster lets out a scream and runs off, jumping out through the window he jumped in. Well, everyone came rushing into the room to see if Elizabeth was alright. Elizabeth was in hysterics. Victor looked out the window and could see where the monster ran off. Then he walks out of the room. His father runs after him and is like, Victor, Victor, where are you going? Victor says to his dad, Dad, I'm going after that thing. No, son, no, said his father. Warn the authorities, he said to his son, and let them get that monster. You stay here, you have to be with your soon-to-be wife. Victor turns to look at his dad and says, I'm sorry, Dad. I was responsible for that thing's existence. Now I have to be responsible for its destruction. He goes into the room, shuts the door behind him. Moments later, he comes out. He had changed from his suit that he was wearing to get married. Now he was wearing his hunting suit, and he reloaded his black powdered rifle, and he carried his pistol. Then he turns to look at his father and says, Dad, I know our relationship has been strained for years since Mother's died, but I have to say this before I go. I'm sorry I was never the son that you wanted. I was too progressive for your taste. Well, if I don't make it back, Dad, look after Elizabeth. Then the Baron says, good God, man, you're actually serious. You're serious about going after that thing. Well, Heinrich runs down the hall and comes up to Victor. Victor says, Heinrich, look after Elizabeth for me and look after my dad. I'm going after that thing. I gotta take responsibility for what I've done. Heinrich says, Victor, no, don't do it. Tell the burgomaster and let him get a party together to get that thing. Victor says to Heinrich, no, I have to do it. I don't want any more people to die, said Victor. Then Victor walks off, leaves the castle. He goes and gets his dad's hunting dogs. And then he departs on the hunt for the monster. Meanwhile, in the village, the wedding festivity was still going. Nobody knew of what happened at the castle. People were still singing, dancing, playing musical instruments, children were playing. But soon that happiness would turn very sad as the father Maria and her mother were walking into the village. Maria's father was carrying her lifeless body in his arms. Soon the music stopped and the people stopped celebrating as they watched Maria's father walking down the road with her lifeless body. He puts the body on a table and says, Where's the burgomaster? Where's the burgomaster? The burgomaster approaches the disheartened father, Maria, and tries to console him. He asks him what happened. Then Maria's father explains about the monster that attacked his daughter and threw her in the water. Well, he was not the only one. Soon other people had come into the village, talking about a monster that was terrorizing the countryside. Then Heinrich comes running up to the burgomaster and explains to him the events at the castle. The people began screaming in terror, wondering what's going to be done. Well, the burgomaster said, okay, I need able-bodied men for volunteers, and I need you women to run back home and lock your doors. And if any of you have dogs, please donate them to us. We need them to track down this monster. Well, soon enough, all the able-bodied men in the village organized into a mob. The burgomaster issued each one a leader. Heinrich was going to lead the mob that was going to go search the mountains, while the others were going to the lakeside and the others were going out to the plains. Well, the angry villagers departed, bearing torches, pitchforks, and rifles. Well, the late afternoon had turned to night as the sun was setting. Victor Frankenstein's dogs had led him to the old windmill. They were going crazy, running around it. Surely the monster had to be in there. Frankenstein enters the windmill looking for the monster. It was pretty noisy in there with all the gears moving from the giant windmill outside. But Frankenstein climbs a long, narrow wooden stairwell up to the top level of the windmill, where sure enough the monster was there. The monster saw him and ran after him. Frankenstein quickly drew his rifle and fired a shot. The bullet did hit the monster, but it hit him in the stomach, and it didn't bring him down. It just made him angry. Then he keeps on running for Frankenstein. Frankenstein quickly pulls out his powdered pistol and fires another shot. The bullet hit the monster in the chest, but not in the heart. It stopped the monster momentarily again, but then he comes running after Frankenstein. Soon, Frankenstein and his monster were locked in a death grip with each other, the monster trying to choke him, and he's trying to choke the monster. Meanwhile, the angry villagers had arrived at the windmill after their hunting dogs led them there. Heinrich quickly ran over and retrieved Frankenstein's hunting dogs and secured them. Well, the angry villagers figured that the monster was in there just by all the dogs, and quickly set the place alight. The windmill was going up quickly as Frankenstein and his monster were fighting to the death. Finally, the monster hit Frankenstein with a tremendous force that knocked him unconscious, then lifted him up in the air, walked out to the balcony of the windmill. The villagers were screaming, "Look, look, it's the Baron's son! He's got the Baron's son!" Then the monster flung Frankenstein from the balcony, and he landed on the ground with a hard thud. The villagers screamed in terror as they saw the Baron's son hit the ground from such a high altitude with such a force. But as for the monster, he was trapped in the burning windmill. The monster was trapped. He was running around trying to find an exit, panicking. He began screaming in terror, knowing that his end was nigh. Meanwhile, outside, Heinrich runs over to his friend's lifeless body. There was a lot of blood coming out of his mouth. Heinrich puts his finger over his jugular to feel for a pulse. He feels a pulse. It was very faint. He screams to the mob, "Guys, he's still alive. He's got a pulse. Quickly, someone bring a wagon and some horses. We'll take him back to the castle." Then everyone turned to look as they heard the sound of the building collapsing. It was all over. The monster was dead. Peace had returned. The people were now feeling safe, and Frankenstein, by some strange miracle, had survived, with no broken bones. He was recovering, with Elizabeth nursing him back to health. They were going to get married as soon as Frankenstein recovered. The end. Like and subscribe.